Emily sat on the old wooden porch, staring at the endless horizon that stretched out in front of her. The ranch was quiet, almost too quiet. There were no cattle grazing, no sound of workers busying themselves in the barn, and no footsteps echoing on the hard dirt path. Just the sound of the wind rustling through the dry grass and the occasional bird call. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, like it was hiding something she didn't want to face. She hadn't meant for things to turn out this way. Her mind wandered back to the beginning, to the days when she first arrived at the ranch, bright-eyed and full of hope. She remembered the way Sam's smile made her feel safe, the way his hand in hers felt like everything would be all right. Sam was different from the others. He didn't care about the wealth his family had built. He didn't care about the ranch's reputation. He just wanted to live a peaceful life, far away from the drama and pressure that his family constantly imposed. But over time, things changed. They had been married for 2 years when Sam's family started to make their presence known in their relationship. At first, it was small things, unspoken expectations, harsh comments about how she should manage the house, how she should behave as the wife of a rancher. Sam had brushed it all off, but Emily felt the weight of it. It was as if his parents, particularly his mother, Margaret Turner, had been keeping a watchful eye over them from the moment they stepped into the family's world. Sam had told her not to worry. "It's just the way things are around here. My family is old-fashioned, but they'll come around," he had said, trying to reassure her. But the pressure only grew heavier. Margaret Turner was a woman of strong opinions and even stronger ways. She didn't think much of Emily, even before Sam's accident. Margaret believed that Emily wasn't strong enough to handle the ranch life, that she lacked the fortitude needed to fit into their world. She would often criticize Emily for the smallest things, from the way she handled the cattle to the way she dressed. Emily had grown tired of it, but she never let on to Sam. She didn't want to seem weak in his eyes. But then came the accident. The day it happened was still so fresh in Emily's mind, as though the memory was burned into her very soul. It had been an early morning when Sam went out to check on the cattle, like he did every day. But that day something went wrong. The tractor slipped on the wet ground and Sam was caught underneath. By the time the neighbors arrived, it was too late. He was gone. Emily couldn't understand it. One moment he was there, his voice laughing with hers over breakfast, and the next he was gone. She had to watch him be buried in the cold earth, and with him, part of her had been buried too. But what followed was even worse than the loss. The Turners, led by Margaret, wasted no time in reminding Emily of her place. Sam's death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a business opportunity for them. They had no compassion for Emily's grief. Instead, they saw an opening to take control of everything that Sam had left behind. His inheritance, his land, his ranch, it was all theirs, or so they believed. "Sam's gone, Emily. It's time for you to face reality," Margaret had said in the days following Sam's funeral. "You'll never be able to manage this ranch on your own. You've never been cut out for this life." Emily, still in shock, couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had always believed that family meant sticking together, especially in times of crisis. But the Turners had a different idea of family. To them, it was all about power, wealth, and control, and they didn't want Emily to be part of their legacy anymore. "You can stay here for a while," Margaret continued coldly, "but you'll have to leave soon. The land is too much for someone like you." Emily's world spun. She didn't know what to say. Her husband's family, the people she had trusted, were throwing her out of the life they had built together. It felt like everything she had known was crumbling beneath her feet. She had no idea what to do or where to go. The days that followed were filled with meetings and legal papers. The Turners insisted that Emily sign away any claim to Sam's land. They made it clear that they wanted nothing to do with her. Sam's brothers came in and out, making cold, indifferent remarks about her future as though her feelings didn't matter. Emily had never felt more alone. Her father-in-law, John Turner, was the worst of all. He didn't try to hide his disdain for her. "You never belonged here," he had said one night when they were alone. "You don't have the strength to handle a ranch. You never did. Sam was the one who carried this place, not you." The words cut deeper than anything Emily had ever heard. Sam had been her partner, her love, her strength. To hear his family speak of him as though he was the only one who mattered hurt her in ways she couldn't explain. As the weeks passed, Emily found herself living in a half-empty house. The memories of Sam were everywhere. his boots by the door, his jacket hanging on the back of a chair. She would sit in the room where they had shared so many quiet evenings, the silence around her too loud. The ranch that had once felt like home now felt like a prison. One day she sat down in the barn, her tears mixing with the dust of the old wood. The cattle, oblivious to her pain, moved quietly in the distance. The wind rustled through the dry grass, and for a moment Emily felt like she could breathe. She couldn't stay here any longer. She had to get out. But where would she go? How would she survive? The Turners had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with her. And without Sam, Emily felt like she had no place left in this world. The grief of losing him still tore at her heart, but the weight of their cold rejection felt even worse. In that moment, something shifted inside of her. She wasn't going to let them break her. She wasn't going to let them take everything that Sam had worked for, everything that she had built with him. She wasn't going to let their cruelty define her. She stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from her hands, and looked out at the horizon. She might not have a plan, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let the Turners win. The sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the ranch. The air was hot and dry, with only the faintest breeze to break the stillness. Emily stood by the front gate, her heart heavy in her chest. She hadn't left the ranch yet, though she knew she should. But part of her still clung to the hope that Sam's family would have a change of heart, that they would see her as more than just a widow who no longer belonged to their world. She had been wrong. It was Margaret Turner's voice that broke through the quiet of that afternoon, sharp and commanding. "Emily!" Margaret called from the front porch, her tone like a whip cracking in the air. "Come here now." Emily turned slowly, the weight of what was coming hanging over her like a storm cloud. She walked toward the porch, her boots dragging against the dirt. As she reached the steps, Margaret was standing at the top, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I've had enough of this," Margaret said, her eyes narrowing. "You've made it clear that you don't want to leave. But you're not going to stay here any longer pretending like you belong." Her voice was cold, each word carefully chosen to hurt. "You've been a burden on this family long enough." Emily flinched, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. She had no words left, not for Margaret, not for anyone. Everything she had once known, everything she had trusted was slipping away. Margaret turned her back and motioned for Emily to follow. Reluctantly, Emily did. They walked toward the barn where the late afternoon sun cast an orange glow on the hay bales. The space was empty, quiet except for the sound of hooves shifting in the distance. The horses were in the far pasture, grazing lazily under the fading light. The barn felt like a forgotten place, a place where memories were stored away and left to gather dust. But Emily wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. As they stepped inside, Margaret's voice broke through the silence once again. "It's time you learned your place, Emily. You think you can just run away from the responsibilities Sam left behind? You think you can just walk away from the Turner name?" Emily looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I'm not running away. You don't get to speak," Margaret snapped, her voice ringing out with authority. "You've never understood what it means to be part of this family, and you'll never understand. Not as long as you live." Margaret's words were like a blow, each one hitting Emily harder than the last. She had tried to be a good wife, a good daughter-in-law. She had tried to fit in, but nothing was ever good enough for Margaret. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as Margaret reached for a large pair of shears hanging on the wall. They were old, worn, and the metal gleamed under the dim light of the barn. "No," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Please don't, but it was too late." Margaret had already turned toward her, the shears now in her hands, and her expression was one of pure determination. "You need to be humbled, Emily. You've let your grief get in the way of everything. You need to understand what it means to live in this world, to live as part of the Turner family. You need to let go of the past." Before Emily could move, Margaret stepped forward and grabbed a lock of her hair, pulling it harshly. Emily gasped, trying to pull away, but Margaret's grip was unyielding. The shears snipped through the strands of her hair with a sharp, unforgiving sound. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she felt the weight of her hair fall to the ground in clumps. "No, stop," Emily cried out, her voice cracking with desperation. But Margaret didn't listen. She continued to cut, her hands moving with a precision that made Emily's stomach twist in fear. She couldn't believe this was happening. She had never imagined something so cruel, so humiliating. The shears clicked shut with a finality that echoed in the quiet barn. Margaret stepped back, holding up the cut strands of Emily's hair as if they were trophies. "There," Margaret said, her voice thick with satisfaction. "Now you're ready to understand your place. You are nothing, Emily. Just a widow with no future, no family, no purpose. And this is the price you pay for it." Emily stood there stunned, her hands trembling at her sides. She could feel the cold air on her scalp where her hair had once been. She was no longer the woman she had been. The image of herself, once so clear and strong, was now shattered. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as though all the strength she had left was being taken from her piece by piece. But something inside her shifted. The sting of humiliation was sharp, but it was also a spark that lit a fire in her heart. Margaret's cruelty would not define her. She would not let it. Without saying another word, Emily turned and walked out of the barn, her bare scalp cold against the setting sun. The weight of what had just happened was still sinking in, but there was something else building inside her, something that made her stand taller. Even with the weight of everything she had lost, she didn't belong to Margaret. She didn't belong to the Turners. She belonged to herself. As she stepped away from the barn, she could hear Margaret's voice behind her, but it was fading now, distant and empty. It no longer had power over her. Emily knew what she had to do. She had to leave. She had to find a way to survive without the control of the Turners, without the shadow of their cruelty hanging over her every step. Her first step was to leave the ranch, and she would do it, no matter the cost. This part explores the intense humiliation and emotional breaking point Emily reaches when Margaret forces her to undergo the shaming act of shaving her hair. However, it also highlights Emily's growing resilience and determination to reclaim her dignity, setting the stage for her journey toward independence and strength. The days after the painful ordeal in the barn felt like an endless blur to Emily. The shock of the loss, the sting of her family-in-law's rejection, and the humiliation of her shaved head were all too much to bear. She moved through her days like a ghost, barely aware of what was happening around her. Every corner of the ranch felt cold and unwelcoming. Every room reminded her of Sam, and with him gone, the house seemed too big, too empty. Emily had spent the past few days trying to gather the strength to leave the Turner ranch. She knew she couldn't stay there any longer, not after what had happened. But where would she go? She had no family to turn to. Her parents lived far away, and she hadn't spoken to them in years. The thought of asking them for help felt like a last resort, a place she didn't want to reach just yet. One morning, after a restless night, Emily made up her mind. She packed a small bag with a few belongings, clothes, some personal items, and a small photo of Sam that she kept in her pocket. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay. She didn't want to be a part of the Turners' world any longer. As Emily walked down the dirt road leading away from the ranch, the sun had just begun to rise, casting long shadows over the land. The smell of the earth, the dry grass, and the distant sound of the cattle filled the air. But there was something different about it now. It wasn't the familiar sound of home. It was the sound of a place she had left behind, a place that no longer had any power over her. The road was quiet, and Emily felt a mix of fear and freedom in her chest. She had no plan, no direction, but she knew she had to move forward. She couldn't let the past control her any longer. It was then that she saw him. A figure on horseback appeared on the horizon, slowly making his way toward her. He rode with ease, the horse moving gracefully under him. As the rider drew closer, Emily could see that he was a tall man, probably in his late 30s, with dark hair and a rugged, weathered face. His eyes were kind, but there was a seriousness about him, as if he had seen more than his fair share of hard times. The man pulled his horse to a stop in front of her, his eyes scanning her face. Emily hesitated, unsure of what to say. She had never been good at talking to strangers, and after everything that had happened, she wasn't sure she could trust anyone. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Emily nodded, but she didn't speak. She didn't know how to explain what had happened, how to tell him about the Turners, the ranch, and the pain she was feeling. She felt as if words could never fully capture the weight of her situation. The man studied her for a moment, his gaze softening. "You don't look all right," he said gently. "Where are you headed?" Emily didn't know how to answer. She had no destination in mind. "I don't really know," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I had to leave." The man nodded slowly, as if he understood. "I can see that you've been through a lot. But you don't have to walk alone. There's a ranch nearby not far from here, my place. I could offer you a place to stay if you need it. Emily was taken aback. She had barely said anything to this man, and yet he was offering her a place to stay? She didn't know what to make of it. It seemed too good to be true, especially after the way the Turners had treated her. "Why would you help me?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. The man shrugged, his face calm. "I've been through hard times too. Life has a way of throwing things at you when you least expect it, but that doesn't mean you have to face it all alone." Emily wasn't sure what to say. She was tired, both mentally and physically, and the idea of going somewhere safe, somewhere away from the Turners, was tempting. But the doubt in her heart held her back. What if this man was just like everyone else? What if he had his own hidden motives? The man seemed to sense her hesitation. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "I just want to help. You can stay as long as you need, and when you're ready, you can go. No strings attached." Emily hesitated for another moment, her mind racing. She didn't know who this man was, but there was something in his voice, something in the way he spoke that made her believe him. He wasn't trying to control her, to manipulate her. He was offering her something she hadn't had in a long time: kindness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emily nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll come with you." The man smiled, and for the first time in days, Emily felt a small glimmer of hope. He turned his horse around and motioned for her to follow him. The ride to his ranch wasn't long, but the journey was more than just physical for Emily. As they rode side by side, the wind in her face and the vast land stretching out before her, she began to feel a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a while, she felt like she was moving in the right direction. When they arrived at the ranch, Emily was surprised by how different it was from the Turner estate. The ranch was small but well kept, with a few buildings spread out along a dirt road. There were horses in the stable, cows grazing nearby, and a large barn that seemed to be the heart of the operation. It wasn't as grand or as impressive as the Turner ranch, but it had a warmth to it that made Emily feel like she could breathe again. The man introduced himself as Hank Miller. He was a rancher just like Sam had been, but Hank seemed to live a different kind of life. He was down to earth, practical, and kind. Emily could tell he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to take anything from her. Over the next few days, Hank showed Emily around the ranch. He didn't ask her to do anything she wasn't comfortable with. He simply let her be, offering her food, a place to sleep, and the space to heal. Emily didn't feel judged. She didn't feel the weight of expectations hanging over her like she had at the Turner ranch. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Emily. For the first time in weeks, she began to feel like she was in control of her own life again. The future was uncertain, but for now she was safe. And for now, that was enough. The days at Hank's ranch passed in a calm rhythm, each one blending into the next. Emily woke up early, just as the sun began to rise, and spent her mornings with Hank, helping with the horses and tending to the small garden near the barn. There was something peaceful about the quiet, steady work. The animals had no expectations of her. They simply needed care and attention, and Emily was happy to give it. For the first time since Sam's death, she felt like she could breathe again. Yet even as she worked to restore some sense of normalcy, the memory of the Turner family haunted her. Every time she glanced at the barn or the horses or the fields stretching out before her, her mind wandered back to the ranch she had left behind. She could almost hear Margaret's sharp voice cutting through the air, demanding that she know her place. She could almost feel the weight of Sam's family's disapproval, always hanging over her. But there, in the quiet comfort of Hank's ranch, Emily began to piece herself back together. She was learning things she had never known before. She had never spent so much time working with animals or taking care of things on her own. Hank, though a man of few words, was a patient teacher, always willing to show her how to handle the horses or fix a fence, always encouraging her to try new things. Slowly but surely, Emily found herself gaining confidence. Still, a part of her remained uncertain. Hank was kind, too kind, and the more she thought about it, the more she wondered if his kindness had any hidden motive. He had given her a place to stay, a safe place to heal, but did he expect something in return? Was he doing this because he wanted her to stay forever? She had been taken advantage of before, and the fear of it happening again still lingered deep inside. It wasn't long before Emily's worries began to surface. The moment Hank noticed her hesitation, he spoke to her one evening after dinner. They sat on the porch, the night air cool and crisp as they sipped hot coffee. The stars twinkled above them, and for a brief moment Emily felt at peace. "You're quieter than usual tonight," Hank said, his eyes studying her carefully. "Something on your mind?" Emily hesitated, unsure of how to voice the doubts that had been growing inside her. She shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening around her coffee mug. "I don't know. I guess I've been thinking a lot about everything, about why you're helping me and what you expect from me. I don't want to be a burden." Hank's expression softened, and he set his mug down on the wooden table. "You're not a burden, Emily. You're not a burden to anyone here. I told you when you first came here that you could stay as long as you need. No strings attached. I meant that." But even as he said it, Emily couldn't help but feel a nagging doubt. It was hard for her to believe that anyone could do something so kind, without expecting anything in return. She had been betrayed before. The Turners had taught her to distrust others, to always be cautious of people who offered help without expecting something in return. "I don't know if I can stay here forever, Hank," she said quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't want to owe anyone anything. I don't want to feel like I'm being controlled again, like I'm stuck in someone else's life." Hank didn't speak for a long moment. He simply stared at the night sky, his gaze distant as if thinking about something far away. Emily couldn't read his expression. Was he upset? Disappointed? Finally, Hank turned back to her. "You don't owe me anything, Emily, not now, not ever. I don't want to control you. I don't want to change you. You can leave whenever you feel ready. This ranch is your place to find your feet again, to decide what you want." The simplicity of his words struck Emily hard. It was the first time anyone had said something like that to her, something that didn't come with expectations, something that didn't make her feel small or powerless. She realized that Hank wasn't like the Turners. He wasn't trying to trap her or make her feel indebted. He was offering her freedom, not control. And for the first time in a long while, Emily felt a flicker of hope. But even as she felt a wave of relief wash over her, another feeling settled in. She couldn't stay on Hank's ranch forever. She couldn't rely on him forever. She had to find a way to take control of her own life, to make her own decisions, to stand on her own 2 feet. The next morning, after a quiet breakfast with Hank, Emily went to the barn. She had decided to spend the day working alone, to prove to herself that she could handle things by herself. She fed the horses, cleaned out their stalls, and even spent time grooming one of the older mares, a gentle creature who had taken a liking to Emily. The barn smelled of hay and earth, a comforting scent that seemed to ground her, reminding her of simpler times when life hadn't been so complicated. As the day wore on, Emily realized something important. She was capable. She had always been capable. Her fears and doubts, the ones that had held her back for so long, were only things she had allowed to control her. She wasn't a helpless widow. She wasn't a burden to anyone. She was a woman who had faced unimaginable loss and still found the strength to keep going. She didn't need Hank's help anymore. She didn't need to rely on anyone but herself. That afternoon, as she sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Hank came over and sat beside her. They didn't speak right away, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. Emily had made her decision. She was ready to move forward. She didn't know exactly where she was headed, but she knew it was time to take the next step on her own. "I think I'm ready to leave," she said softly. Her voice steady and sure. Hank looked at her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held a quiet respect. "If that's what you want, Emily, I won't stop you. You've come a long way since you first arrived here." Emily smiled, a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. "I know, I'm not the same person I was when I first came here. But I need to find my own way. I need to stand on my own 2 feet. Hank nodded, his face softening. "I understand. And I'll always be here if you need a place to come back to. Don't forget that." Emily didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. She wasn't going to live in the shadow of her past. She was going to take charge of her life and make her own decisions, no matter how uncertain the road ahead might seem. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Emily felt a sense of peace. She had taken the first step toward her independence, and it was a step that would lead her toward a future of her own making. The morning after her conversation with Hank, Emily woke up with a sense of finality in her heart. The decision to leave was made, and now all she had to do was take the next step. She could feel the weight of her past lifting, piece by piece. But there was still something inside her that held her back, something small but significant. A fear that had been planted deep within her by the Turners, something that made her question every decision she made. As she packed her bag, folding the few belongings she had brought with her, she thought about Hank and the kindness he had shown her. His offer of a place to stay, his quiet understanding, and his patience had all helped her heal in ways she never thought possible. But now she realized she had to stand on her own. She couldn't stay forever on Hank's ranch even if he didn't ask anything of her. She needed to be her own person again, to take charge of her future without leaning on anyone else. The sun was already high in the sky when she finished packing. She stepped out of the small cabin where she had been staying, taking a deep breath of the cool morning air. The ranch was quiet at this hour, with the horses grazing in the pasture and the distant sound of the wind rustling the leaves in the trees. It was a peaceful scene, one that had brought her comfort, but it was no longer enough. Hank was outside, fixing the fence along the far end of the property. He looked up when he saw her, wiping his hands on his jeans before walking toward her. His expression was warm but thoughtful, as if he knew what she was about to say. "Ready to go?" he asked, his voice calm but knowing. Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come to like Hank, to trust him in ways she never thought possible after everything she had been through. But she couldn't stay. She had to find her own path away from the past and everything it represented. "I think it's time," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. Hank smiled gently, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I understand. You've come a long way, Emily. You're stronger than you think, and no matter where you go, you've got what it takes to make it on your own." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat, but she fought it down. The road ahead would be hard, she knew that. But it was a road she had to walk even if she was uncertain of where it would lead her. She didn't have all the answers, but she couldn't stay stuck in the past, unable to move forward. She had to choose freedom, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. "I'll never forget what you've done for me," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a place when I had nothing, Hank. You showed me kindness when I didn't deserve it. I won't forget that." Hank placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to thank me. You've earned your strength, Emily. You've come a long way from the woman who first arrived here. I'm proud of you." Emily smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle in her chest. She had found a part of herself again, a part she thought was lost forever. And while the future was still uncertain, she knew that she was no longer the same woman who had walked into Hank's ranch months ago. She was stronger, braver, and ready to face whatever lay ahead. Before she could say anything else, Hank pulled something from his pocket, a small folded piece of paper. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "It's a map. There's a town a few days' ride from here. You might find work there if you're looking. It's not much, but it's a start." Emily took the map, grateful for the gesture. She didn't know where the town was or what she would do once she got there, but it was a place to begin. It was a way forward. "Thank you," she said again, her voice quieter this time, as if the weight of her gratitude was too much to put into words. "I don't know where I'd be without you." "You'll be fine, Emily," Hank replied. "You've got the strength inside you. Just keep moving forward." With one last look at the ranch, Emily turned and walked toward the road. She felt a mixture of fear and excitement rise in her chest as she left behind the place that had healed her, the place that had given her a chance to start over. But this was her journey now, and it was time for her to take the next step on her own. The road ahead was long, but as she walked, she felt something inside her shift, a sense of purpose, of possibility. She was no longer weighed down by the past, no longer defined by the cruelty she had faced. She was free. As Emily walked toward her future, the sky above her was wide and open, stretching out like a canvas ready to be painted with the story of her life. She didn't know what that story would look like, but she knew one thing for sure. It was hers to write. She had reclaimed her freedom, her dignity, and most importantly, her independence. The road might be difficult. She might face hardships along the way. But Emily knew she had the strength to face them. She had faced the worst of what life could throw at her, and had survived. Now it was time to build something new, to shape her own destiny. And as she walked away from Hank's ranch, she could feel the weight of the past slipping off her shoulders, one step at a time. The future was uncertain, but it was hers. And that, for the first time in a long while, felt like enough.